And now it's time for the Salina Post Sports Friday Night Preview with Tyler Henry and Devin Hanney.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in for another installment of the Salina Post Sports Friday Night Preview Show. Tyler Henry joined here by Devin Hanney as we get you set, presented by Kansas Wesleyan, to take a look ahead to week number 8 and see what happens in what will be one of the biggest weeks of high school football across the state of Kansas. Teams fighting it out for the final remaining few playoff spots, some teams fighting it out for a home playoff game, and in some cases, which again we'll revisit later in the show, a chance to secure home field advantage throughout the course of the playoffs. But before we do any of that, let's take a look back at our Week 7 area scoreboard presented by Bennington State Bank. It was a big one for our area, and we begin in Class 5A, where Salina Central, they battled, but they fell to Andover 14-21. But Devin Hanney, one game that I do want to take a moment and revisit, Salina South, they have finally got the monkey off their back. They snap a 30-game losing streak that stretched back 3.5 seasons with a dominant 42-23 win over the Campus Colts.
Yeah, honestly, when I texted you and told you the score, because I knew you were kind of on your way home, and I was already home, and it was one of those things that's like, we're all rooting for them, right? It's like, let's get this train back on the track and let's get it rolling. And I honestly didn't know it had been that long. And for it to be 30 games, of course, I'm not with them every week, and I'm always with Southeast of Salina, but man, what a great job by those guys to get everything going. I saw then their JV team got a victory this week, so that they got a win also. So things probably feeling pretty good right now in the Cougar locker room getting ready for tonight.
Well, and if you're first-year head coach Christian Ozoris, you couldn't have asked for a better birthday present just a couple of days before his birthday. So the guys go out, they get it a win. We're hoping that's the start of something big for them. Elsewhere in the state, Abilene knocked off El Dorado 38-7. Chapman fell to Marysville, the final in that game 50-8. And Devin, unfortunately, that does eliminate the Chapman Fighting Irish from playoff contention. They do still have a game this week, but because of the earlier loss to Concordia earlier in the year, Chapman will not play in the 3A state playoffs this season. Southeast of Salina, they came out and walloped Halstead 38-15. Wasn't always pretty, but they got the job done. And meanwhile, in an all-NCAA clash, Beloit knocked off Ellsworth last week 20-7 in a game that saw very limited offense. Sacred Heart, don't look now, it's 2 in a row. They knock off the Harrington Railers last week by a final score of 22-16. And as we talk a little bit more later in the show, they've actually got a chance to play for a home playoff game coming up this week. We'll talk more about that again in our next segment. Minneapolis, they also punched a ticket to the playoffs. That's a frisky Lions team that I don't think is necessarily indicative of their record, Devin, but with a 35-15 win over the Russell Broncos, they survived through their district. They will be advancing to the 2A state playoffs here this year.
Yeah, it was a good week, really. I mean, other for Ellsworth with the NCAA schools, right? I mean, Sacred Heart won. Minneapolis got into the playoffs. Beloit won. They strengthened their stand in their district as well. Southeast of Salina kept it going. I mean, just kind of a good NCAA week for the schools in the North Central Activities Association.
Certainly was. Elsewhere in the state, we look down to our 8-man area scoreboard. No surprise here. El Saline, they took it to Gossel 58-8. But how about this? Maybe the shock of the week, Devin. Solomon knocks off Canton Galva, a previous 8-man Division II perennial power. They get it by a close 38-36 round. But speaking of teams that have now won 2 in a row, Solomon is on the march down in 8-man.
Solomon's got a couple of wins now. They're feeling good about themselves. Sacred Heart has a couple of wins now. They're feeling good about themselves. So while we see some people fall off in the area that we cover, there's some people on the rise as well.
Absolutely. And speaking of which, let's go ahead and take a look at where teams stand as we go into week number 8. Again, in most cases, everybody in Class 5A, everybody in Class 4A will make the state playoffs. But of course, with the way the districts are set up, an 8-man on through the class of 2A, 3A, there are a chance for teams to miss the postseason. So everybody is safe for the most part, except for Chapman, who, as we mentioned, have missed the playoffs. Minneapolis has just snuck in. Let's go ahead and take a look at where everybody is as we go into week number 8. Salina Central's got a big one coming up here against a big foe in Goddard. Goddard rolls into town at 6-1. Salina Central is at 3-4. They are playing for a potential spot on the upper half of the bracket, but it's not going to be easy against the Lions. That is our Salina Regional Orthopedic and Sports Medicine game of the week. Salina South is going to have their hands full this week as they look to make it 2 in a row. They take on the Eagles of Maize. Abilene, you talk about having your hands full for the Abilene Cowboys. They come in at 3-4. They will have to play a 4A power in Wamego to wrap up NCKL play. Chapman already out. They take on Rock Creek here this week. Southeast of Saline's got a fun one. We'll have coverage of that right here on KINA as they take on the Ellsworth Bearcats. Minneapolis, who again cannot improve their seed, but they still want to make sure they finish on a high note. They face Phillipsburg here tonight. Sacred Heart plays Republic County. Devin will talk more about that game later on in the show, but that is actually a contest now for a home playoff game between two teams that come in at 2-4 overall. And then Bennington plays Harrington. That, at least in terms of importance, Devin, is actually the biggest game of the week. It's two 0-7 schools. So you look at that, maybe you shake your head a little bit, but one of them has to go to the playoffs because they are in the same district. It's a pretty simple scenario for Bennington and Harrington. You win and you're in here this week.
Right. A couple of years ago, we went to after everything was reclassified, and I still don't know, I run into people all the time, they don't understand how the classifications work, and I get this a lot because I'm with Southeast of Salina, and people say, oh, well, they're 2A now? It's not now, it is a new system. It was a reclassification. It was basically because the state started to recognize six-man football. They also wanted to decrease the number of teams in each class. So back in the day when there were 64 teams, and a lot of people remember this, you would end the regular season on a Thursday, then you would play again the following Tuesday, then have another potential game the following Saturday. You were playing 3 games, Tyler, in the span of 9 days. Of course, the concern about concussions and things of that nature crept in. They had to decrease that. Now, all the games are on Friday for the most part, unless you make it to that final weekend. If you're in 2A, you're still going to play a state championship on Friday this year. But it's a reclassification. So when you look at a school like Southeast of Saline, they're 2A. They're actually right in the middle. There's classifications above them, the same amount of classifications below them. So what you have in these districts are 5-team districts, and you have to get 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the district to be eligible for the playoff bracket. If you don't get in the top 4 and you're the 5th team, you're the odd man out, you will have a game on week 9, but you know that will be your last game.
Yep, there is a Week 9 game for almost everybody in the state, no matter who you are or where you play.
Did I do okay?
You did. No, you absolutely nailed it. Okay. It's one of those topics you're like, explain this in 30 seconds or less, and you just see people get panicked in their eyes. But yeah, you did a great job of explaining that, and it's the same down in 8-man, whereas we wrap up our area scoreboard. El Saline plays Central Plains. Boy, that is going to be one of the best games in the state of Kansas this week. That is a really fun matchup down in 8-man.
I'll tell you, the cards of El Saline have been rolling, and this is just another test. It's another chance to kind of put another crown on their wall, so to speak. But boy, if they can get this win and really kind of get all of that momentum that they have built over the season into the playoffs, this El Saline team could be dangerous. They're already fun to watch, but man, they could really do some damage in the playoffs in Class 1A.
Both teams come in that one 4-0 in district play. Both teams come in 6-1 in 8-man Division 1. And speaking of Division 1, the last team competing for a spot, they've already locked up a spot, as a matter of fact, the Solomon Gorillas. I want to tip my cap to Solomon. They started the year off 0-5. Things were not looking good, but they come out, they beat Gossel confidently, they squeaked by Canton Galva last week, and they have already punched a ticket to the 8-man Division 1 playoffs. They will play their final regular season game here this week as they take on another perennial ranked foe in Little River. That is it for a look at, again, all that happened last week in Week 7, all that's coming up here in Week number 8. We'll step away, but when we come back, we'll hear from Salina Central head coach Mark Sandbo and get you ready for our Salina Regional Orthopedic and Sports Medicine Game of the Week. That when we return, you're tuned in right here on KINA. It's the Salina Post Sports Friday Night Preview Show.
With record-breaking enrollment, great new facilities, and top-notch activities, Kansas Wesleyan's the place to be. Whether you want to study nursing, elementary education, criminal justice, or social work, our academic programs will open doors for your future, all while you participate in activities like music, theater, or athletics. Learn more about why KWU's the place to be by visiting kwu.edu. That's kwu.edu.
The hours of drills, the pre-dawn workouts, the hundreds of laps. It takes hard work, passion, and drive to do what you love. When you're sidelined by injury, Salina Regional Sports Medicine is just as committed and works just as hard to get you back in the game. Salina Regional Sports Medicine, 785-452-7366. SalinaRegionalSportsMedicine.com.
And now back to the Salina Post Sports Friday Night Preview.
Welcome back in here on the Salina Post Sports Friday Night Preview Show. Just in time for a quick look at our Salina Regional Orthopedic and Sports Medicine Game of the Week, which this week will see Salina Central at 3-4, looking to get to 500 before a Week 9 playoff game, playing host to a very good 6-1 Goddard team. For more on tonight's matchup, we talked with head coach Mark Sandbo of the Central Mustangs. One thing I know that you and the guys talk about a lot over at Salina Central, meeting adversity, finding ways to power through. Overall, what would you say have been kind of the biggest challenges this team has faced, and how have you seen your guys rise to meet those?
Yeah, we've never kind of clicked offensively and defensively at the same time. Maybe when one's struggling, the other is on, and when the other's struggling, the other's on. And when you can put it together and you're both really kind of feeding off each other, that's really positive. It usually leads to a good Friday night. I would say that's maybe one issue. The other is, kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. We've had a problem this year over the past 7 weeks of putting ourselves in a pretty good position, having some momentum, having some rhythm, and then something happens, whether it's a breakdown in the secondary on the defensive side or a missed tackle or a missed assignment, or the same thing offensively. A drop ball, a big penalty, a missed assignment, an inability to execute has kind of just put us behind the eight ball at really at the wrong time.
When you have a chance to scout your opponent coming in here this Friday, it's a very strong Goddard team. We know that. But, when you watch them on film, what are the things that kind of stand out to you right away and just impress you with the way that they play?
Yeah, I always kind of go back to I think they're going to know what we want to do. I think they're going to have a good feel of that. I can say that from what they've done previously against us. They scout us up really well, and they have an understanding of where we want to put our chips. But I think the other thing on it is they know what they want to do, and they're very content doing it. And probably the best, the biggest spotlight I can put on it is what they do offensively. It's not what you see on Saturdays. You probably have to go back a couple of decades to see that type of football, but they do it awfully well, and they want to be really physical with it. They're very content if they have to punt, putting it on their defense. And, that's another thing. When you watch their defense, they play with high energy. They play extremely aggressive. They play downhill, all things from a defensive side or a defensive perspective that you want to see, and they do that.
Well, overall, Coach, when you look at this matchup, specifically as it relates to Goddard, what are your biggest keys to the game? What does Central have to do to pick up the win here and work on putting yourself in a position to win in November?
Yeah, we're gonna absolutely have to stop the run and create some 3-and-outs. Like we got to get them giving us the ball back as much as possible, and that's we're always going to be limited when we play a game like this. Very similar to Andover, a team that wants to run the football and eats the clock and is very content with 3 yards and long drives. We go from maybe 12 to 15 possessions to maybe 7 to 9 possessions. So we have to, on the other side of that, be really really efficient in our scoring within our possessions, and not just 3 points, but making sure if we're in the red zone or we're inside the 10 that we're turning 3 and making sure it's 7. And that's what it's going to require for us to beat a team that's as well coached and as well prepared and as good as what you would expect from a top tier 6-1 5A team.
Once again, that was Mark Sandbo, head coach of your Central Mustangs. His squad taking on Goddard here at 7 o'clock tonight. Just a reminder, we will have full video and audio coverage of that game 100% free on Salina Post. Be sure to check it out tonight there. Pregame begins at 6:40 p.m. We'll step away, but when we come back, we'll get you set for all 3 games that you can tune in for across our Salina Post Sports Network. It's the Salina Post Sports Friday Night Preview Show, and it's presented by Kansas Wesleyan.
The Bennington State Bank proudly supports local sports and wants each student to know that their hard work and talent is noticed and appreciated. At Bennington State Bank, they care about local communities and are committed to fostering long-term relationships through the delivery of excellent customer service, integrity, and fairness. From helping local businesses to supporting community youth and nonprofits to helping you purchase your dream home or invest in your future, Bennington State Bank is here to help. Give them a call to experience exceptional banking with hometown service. Bennington State Bank, your trusted hometown bank. Member FDIC.
We spend 1/3 of our lives working to build our wealth. With over 50 years of combined experience, Billings Group wants to be there to help manage yours. If you're planning for retirement or looking for financial coaching, Then come see us on Westchester Drive, east of the YMCA, or visit our website at billingsgroup.com. Securities offered by registered representatives through Private Client Services. Member FINRA, SIPC. Advisory products and services offered by investment advisory representatives through RFG Advisory, a registered investment advisor. RFG Advisory, Billings Group, and Private Client Services are unaffiliated entities.
And now back to the Salina Post Sports Friday Night Preview.
Welcome back in here on the Salina Post Sports Friday Night Preview Show. Tyler Henry joined once again by Devin Hanney as we get you ready for all three games that you couldn't tune into with live streaming video and audio commentary. These games all taking place on our Salina Post Sports Network. Again, you can tune in on YouTube or on Salina Post. Of course, southeast of Salina, as always, right here on KINA. We begin, as we always do, with a team that, boy, Devin got off to a really rough start, but has bounced back in style. The Sacred Heart Knights started their season. They had a game that, boy, it looked like it was going to be their first win. It got wiped out due to weather. Nothing was going the way of the Knights, but they come back and get big wins in each of the last 2 weeks. They've already locked up a playoff spot, and as they go to take on Republic County, they could be playing in Salina in week number 9.
Yeah, home sweet home, right? It's an old NCAA battle. I mean, these are two teams that for the last few years, they've been in the bottom of the NCAA, a little outmatched when you look at enrollment from top to bottom. It's usually southeast of Saline, Ellsworth, Beloit, and then kind of in the middle there, you have Minneapolis, and then Republic County, Sacred Heart at the bottom. The newcomer this year to the NCAA is Lions. They're going to fit in there somewhere, but this is a chance for these two teams to earn a home game, as you said, for the first round of the playoffs that start in week 9.
It certainly is. And speaking of teams that are fighting it out for potentially a spot on the upper half of the bracket, again, we don't know how it works out because 5A, boy, it's such a free-for-all. You know, you get down to 3A, 2A, 1A, 5 teams, the top 4 make it. You know where you're going to be. It's just a jumble in classes 4 and 5A all the way up to 6A, and that leaves Salina Central in a bit of a precarious position. They come in this week at 3 and 4. They probably feel like they've let a couple of these games get away from them. They fell to Arc City earlier this season in week 2. They fell in that game by a final score of 31-30. That is an Arc City team whose only win this season came against the Salina Central Mustangs. Obviously, they dropped their contest to state-ranked and still undefeated Goddard Eisenhower. They lost to a good state-ranked Andover Central team, but then last week, a chance to bounce back against Andover. They fall in that one 21-14. All that to say, it sets up our Salina Regional Orthopedic and Sports Medicine Game of the Week in Salina. And if you're Central and you want to give yourself a chance to do what the Mustangs have been doing the last couple of weeks or years, and that's win in November, you got to give yourself a chance against a very, very good Goddard Lion team. How about Goddard this year? Tommy Beeson's squad comes in. They're 6-1 overall. Their only loss came to Goddard Eisenhower earlier this season, and they have been rolling. You look at the teams they've played that have been on Salina Central's roster, 41-7 over Newton, 14-13 over Andover, but they came out 60-10 against Salina South, 43-7 against Arc City. That is the run that they have been on here recently. So we heard from Coach Sandbo in the last segment. This is a huge game for his guys to try to position themselves in a better spot. You look at the top of 5A, Devin, you want to avoid all of those teams. You don't want to be traveling to go play a top perennial foe in Class 5A.
Yeah, and as you said, when you get in those upper classes, 4, 5, and 6A, it's hard to sit there and look at the standings or look at the state rankings or even look at records and say, okay, they're the team to avoid in the West, they're the team to avoid in the East, because they play such random schedules anymore. And I'll give you an example of that. 4A, this year is really up for grabs. There's only one undefeated team in 4A, and that's Lewisburg. When you move to 5A, really kind of the same. Great Bend, who has been phenomenal this year, they're still unbeaten. And also you have St. Thomas Aquinas, who has went into Missouri and beaten people like Rockhurst. I mean, they are phenomenal this year. You move into 6A, it's Manhattan and Derby, who are perennial powers. They're going to play for a state title probably at least every 3 years, at least, with those two schools. So, as you said, the first couple of rounds, you want to avoid the upper echelon of those teams that I mentioned. But after that, I mean, who really knows in 4, 5, and 6A?
Well, and think about it this way, too. And this is part of the reason I think we were right to highlight this game here this week. If you're Salina Central, you win this game, you're 4-4. You're playing another 4-4, maybe 5-3 type team. You go down to 3-6. I mean, that or 3-5. You look at the teams that you're going to get on the other side of that bracket. It's huge, and there's just as much on the line for Goddard, a team that wants to make sure that they go 7-1 and they lock up home field for a majority of the rest of the playoffs. It's going to be a fun battle down at Salina Stadium. And speaking of fun battles, it's one that I think coming into this week, Southeast of Saline, they're still going to be the favorites. And I think especially given what's happened these last couple of weeks with Ellsworth. But if there is one team that wants to beat Southeast of Saline more than anybody else in the entire state of Kansas this year that is or is not on their schedule, it's the Ellsworth Bearcats. And they're going to get a chance here at home as they take on Southeast of Saline. It should be a fun one here in week number 8.
Osage City, Humboldt, southeast of Salina, the 3 undefeated teams left in Class 2A. They got a gift last week, did southeast of Salina. Everybody's kind of had a side eye to Norton. The Blue Jays have been cruising this year too, and it was a race to the number 1 seed in the West between southeast of Salina and Norton. Well, last week, Norton had their rivalry game with Phillipsburg. They went into Phillipsburg, and they lost. Not only did they lose, but Phillipsburg crushed them. The Panthers won that game 50-21. That's a Panther squad obviously very strong, but they came into that game, Tyler, 3-3. It's not like they were knocking people off and just cruising through the season. So Norton goes down. Phillipsburg does southeast of Salina favor. So here's what's on the line tonight for the Trojans of Southeast. You can secure an outright NCAA league title. You already secured a share of it when Beloit beat Ellsworth last week. You can secure it outright. You can also secure your 5th straight district title. You can also secure home field advantage throughout the playoffs all the way to the state title game if you go that far. That is something, given the recent format of the past years, Southeast has not had the ability to do just because of the structure. It was always what's your record? What's the East Travels West rule? How many games have you hosted so far? So we have been down to the Final Four, or maybe even a game before that. And southeast of Salina has traveled to places like Kingman, where they lost in double overtime. They've traveled to places like Wichita Collegiate. They've traveled to places like Cheney. That has been the problem, really, I think, because we can put the numbers together, and I will do that in postgame coming up here that starts at 6:30. They are pretty phenomenal at home. Their last loss at home was to Riley County back in 2019. That is crazy to think about. They don't lose at Steve Fritz Field. So to have home field advantage throughout and know that you're going to have a team come in and they're going to have to watch the Trojans come down that hill with their entrance music, and that's the first thing that you got to do today, that's going to be a rough spot. But this Ellsworth squad, you're right. This Bearcat squad will make the playoffs. We know that. They got to get right, man. They got to figure this out. Coach Amolka and the Bearcats have lost 2 in a row now. They have to get back on the winning side of things and get a little bit of momentum. They don't want to lose 3 in a row going to the playoffs, but they have their work cut out for them tonight.
They certainly do, and especially after Beloit was able to completely mitigate their run game. Southeast of Saline's been very good against the run. Last point on Southeast, it's not the point. I know it's not something you will ever hear spoken in that locker room. It's been 1,831 days since Southeast of Saline lost a regular season playoff game. If they can beat Ellsworth here tonight, 5 consecutive undefeated regular seasons. Nobody does this. And you look at the way Southeast schedules every single year. They're going out to play Kingman. They're playing Beloit. They're taking on these teams like Ellsworth.
Clay Center.
They are not scheduling cupcakes. If they can get the win, they are going to be the only team in the state since Andale did it 2 years ago to go 2,000 plus days without a regular season loss. That is absurd.
It seems trivial because we know what the end goal is for the Trojans every single year.
Of course.
But other coaches now are taking note of that. And it may have to do a little bit with the social media posts that you generate sometimes.
Perhaps.
But because we track the Trojans. I mean, that's what we do because they're an area team. But, Tanner Hageman, head coach of Kingman this year, mentioned it to me on pregame. He was like, what's it been, like 1,000 days since they've been beaten? I gave him the exact number, and he went, oh, gosh. Derek Reset last week, Halstead, I'm talking to him in pregame. He was like, hasn't it been like 2,000 days since they've lost a race? Yes, it has. It also gives you a little fuel of fire for your players, too. You want to go knock these guys off in the regular season. So far, nobody's been able to do that since 2019.
No, sir, they have not. Well, speaking of Southeast of Saline, pregame coverage presented by L&L Advisors coming up next. But just a reminder, all 3 of the games we've talked about, you can stream with live video and audio commentary. Pregame coverage for our Game of the Week and for Sacred Heart beginning at 6:40 p.m. Kickoff for all 3 games set for 7 o'clock. That'll do it, though, for us here on the Salina Post Sports Friday night preview show. We'll take a break. When we come back, it's Southeast of Saline pregame. It's the L&L Advisors countdown to kickoff, and it's right here on KINA.